Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo pays his first ever visit to China on the heels of the DPRK-US summit in Singapore. Does this bode well for ongoing efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula? And the 2018 World Cup in Russia opens with glitz and spectacle, with the home team scoring an early victory against Saudi Arabia. A sign of better things to come in this year's World Cup? You're watching World Insight. We begin our program today with the latest trade dispute between China and the United States. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, as well as Chinese Trade Ministry, on Friday expressed firm opposition to U.S. decision to impose 25% tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. The ministry spokesperson says China deeply regrets the U.S. flip-flop, which neglects previous agreements. The spokesperson added that the U.S. move not only hurts the interests of both sides, but also jeopardizes the world trade order. The ministry says that China does not want a trade war, but was forced to take retaliatory measures to defend the interests of the Chinese people and to defend globalization and the multilateral trade system. China's countermeasures will match the U.S. duties, they said. The ministry spokesperson says China urges the international community to join efforts in stopping the slide to a battle of tariffs and defend the international community's common interests. For that, we are also joined in our Beijing studio by Mr. Zhang Junshe, who is a member of the China Committee of the Council of Security Cooperation in East Asia and in the Asia Pacific. Mr. Zhang, welcome to our program. What do you make of the response coming from the Chinese side so far, Mr. Zhang?
Well, I think China strongly supports trade globalism and also the multilateral trade system, and is strongly opposed to unilateral and trade protectionism. China does not want to wage a trade war against the United States, but actually the United States has launched a trade war against China. So we have to take some countermeasures. As a matter of fact, the United States unilateralism and trade protectionism have met with strong opposition from many countries, even from some of its allies, including France, Canada, and Germany. So we hope the United States will think over its measures against other countries and return to a multilateral trade system.
All right, Mr. Zhang Junshe, thank you so much for your comments. We're going to go to you later in other discussions. Thank you, Mr. Zhang. As you may know, regarding the latest round of the trade dispute between China, United States, Chinese Foreign Ministry, as well as China's Commerce Ministry, both responded, as we said earlier. Okay, let's go to another developing story, where Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing met U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday. President Xi said China and the U.S. should solve their differences and promote bilateral ties. This meeting came just 2 days after a historic summit between the DPRK and the U.S. leaders. Earlier, Chinese side counselor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi also held talks with Pompeo. They exchanged views on denuclearization process of the Korean Peninsula. But before we get down to business, let's take a look at all of this background.
Welcome. It was the first trip to China of America's top diplomat. Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomed U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Beijing. President Xi said China and the U.S. should improve understanding, manage differences, and expand cooperation. Pompeo extended greetings from the U.S. President. He said Mr. Trump values his relationship with President Xi, and the U.S. is willing to broaden communication and handle disputes. Earlier, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Pompeo separately. He praised the achievements of the summit between DPRK leader Kim Jong-un and Mr. Trump in Singapore earlier this week.
The meeting has put the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula on the right track to talks and peaceful settlement. It has historic significance.
Pompeo thanked China for its efforts.
And so we appreciate all China did to help put us in the place where that summit could happen, and we thank you for that. There's still more work to be done by China and by the United States to get to the ultimate outcome.
At Tuesday's historical summit, the two leaders signed a joint statement on working toward lasting and stable peace on the peninsula and pledging to build new U.S. DPRK relations. The DPRK agreed on a full and gradual denuclearization, while Trump announced the U.S. is ending war games. The U.S. president also said he was seeking help from China and South Korea. China did help make the summit happen. As a neighbor and regional power, China has played a positive role in promoting peace, hosting the first six-party talks in 2003 and proposing dual suspension in 2017.
So are China and the U.S. on the same page on the Singapore summit after Secretary Pompeo's trip to Beijing? Let's loop in our panelists in Beijing. Once again, we have Mr. Zhang Junshe, who is a member of the China Committee of the Council for Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we have Daryl Kimball, who is the Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. Also joining us in Washington, John Shaws, a senior fellow at the International Securities Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our discussion. One of the most important things to ask Mr. Kimball is, how much do you think the summit in Singapore has managed to loop the issue of denuclearization into the overall security situation settlement in Northeast Asia?
Well, I think the Singapore summit and the communique are a start. As has been said many times since then, the road is going to be very long to achieve denuclearization, complete denuclearization, and a peace regime on the peninsula. This is a minimal basis for further detailed negotiations. I hope that Secretary Pompeo and his Chinese and the North Korean counterparts will get to work very soon to keep up the momentum. Clearly, the issue of denuclearization and the broader issues of peace and security in the region are interlinked. The statement makes this clear. The question is how the action-for-action steps are going to be sequenced and paced in the negotiations that are yet to come. So there's still many questions and a lot of work to be done.
A lot of work. For those of us who witnessed the earlier 6 rounds of the 6-party talks, we all know the enormous amount of work that has to be put into here. And today is only the beginning. But by the way, Mr. Shaws, the Chinese president, when he was meeting with Secretary Pompeo, he's talking about, quote, must be step-by-step fixed. That is the complex issue on the Korean Peninsula. What do you think could be the steps that the U.S. and China can work on, at least the U.S. could agree on and act on?
First, thank you for having me, and good evening.
Great pleasure to have you,
I think the first step is for everyone to take stock of what was the steps and what were the processes that got us to the negotiation in the first place. What led to this meeting? And I think that was a coordinated effort of pressure and intense dialogue between the various parties involved. And if history is a guide, we'll have to keep that up to maintain the kinds of pressure and outcomes that we're seeking ultimately, which have eluded us for more than 60 years. We've seen, at least going this far, an agreement to agree about 12 or 13 times over the past 25 years. And so if we're going to move beyond that, we'll have to see clear, consistent steps by North Korea. We'll have to have steady pressure from the international community to ensure that that happens. And we'll have to find ways to give North Korea the kinds of confidence it needs to proceed without sacrificing overall peace and security on the Korean Peninsula.
Very interesting. Mr. Shaws, then can you elaborate on what kind of things that the U.S. could provide in order to give the DPRK some kind of confidence to proceed with what they have agreed to, so-called step-by-step or action-by-action in a way? What could be the action that the U.S. could take despite of the lip service already quite intense over the past few weeks?
Well, I think thinking through what those actions are might be premature, as North Korea has a number of obligations it's not yet living up to under UN Security Council resolution sanctions and previous commitments it's made to both China, South Korea, and the United States. And I think before we really engage in that conversation, we need to see North Korea really make substantive progress on previous commitments.
All right. The North Koreans claim, Mr. Zhang, here in Beijing, that they have destroyed the missile test center. They have also destroyed some of the earlier test sites, as international community media at least witnessed. Of course, the media did not witness the destroy of it, but rather the final product, apparently, of it. And then they also see the DPRK side going to meet with the U.S. side, with the efforts made by both sides. And they have a document. So do you think the DPRK side, to your understanding, has made some efforts to take actions?
Yes, sure. We have seen that the North Korea side has dismantled its nuclear test sites in northeast North Korea, and also it has dismantled its missile test sites. So I think this is the first step, very positive, toward denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But we know that step by step and action for action. So now I think it's the United States to take some active measures toward this.
All right. Mr. Kimball, I'm sure Mr. Zhang here in China is not representing the DPRK to say anything, but rather as an observer from the region who's involved earlier in various rounds of talks, I mean China, for example, talking about that. So, Mr. Kimball, we also witnessed the United States has certain kinds of credibility issue as well, as an observer from outside, for example. Some of the earlier rounds of six-party talks, if history could be a reference, U.S. did not necessarily implement on time the promises it made to DPRK, for example. And therefore, both sides could have enough ammunition to blame one another. And that's why the talks fall eventually to nowhere. So now we have another momentum, a very starting point. Will we have an early death already at this starting point? Or are we going to see at least a few more steps being taken by both sides to tango a little bit for a healthier process?
Well, I hope so. You know, the past history shows that the two sides did reach important agreements, very much like the one we just saw in Singapore. There was progress in the initial phases. I mean, of course, the agreed framework of 1994 froze North Korea's plutonium program for 8 years. That is a success. But these past agreements fell apart when both sides failed to follow up on the implementation steps in the later phases. So. First of all, we have to talk about what each side needs to do. And let me just go back to your earlier question. The North Koreans have not shut down their test site. They have taken some confidence-building steps. They have halted ballistic missile testing. They continue to produce fissile material. So the first thing I think the United States is going to be demanding that the North Koreans do is to solidify the halt of ballistic missile and nuclear testing, to stop the production of highly enriched uranium and plutonium, and to provide a declaration of North Korea's nuclear weapons holdings and its facilities so that inspectors can verify the accuracy and completeness of that so that it can be dismantled later. At the same time, the United States does need to take additional steps. President Trump suspended the exercises. I think that was a useful confidence-building step, but that could be reversed again. So the thing that the United States, along with China, need to be discussing in parallel with denuclearization is how to formally negotiate a peace treaty that formally ends the Korean War, and how the United States will, over the long term, modify the military exercises to address North Korea's concerns about strategic assets being in the region that could be used for a preventive strike. So those are some of the things that I think should be and will be on the table. But as I said before, the question is the pacing and the sequence. And I think it would be a mistake for one side to say the other should take the first step and the other to demand the other take the first step. That is a recipe for disaster. These steps need to happen in parallel.
Mr. Kimball, with your rich experience about the issue, your opinions are very respectable. However, I have to say, Mr. Scholz, if you look at the two issues, one is for the North Koreans to come up with a list about their nuclear capabilities and about their sites so that the international community can come in and visit and inspect. Vis-a-vis the signing of a peace treaty, which could involve quite a number of countries, at least, and then also international organizations and also international arrangements. So this, the second one, could always take much longer than the very first one. That, in a way, could make the DPRK think, if I provide the list much earlier, while you guys are still trying to work out so-called peace treaty, which we do not know when there's going to be a result, how could we see the action by action, step by step? So there is a time difference, not only about the things that people need to do on both sides, but also the time difference between these steps. These are very practical and could be used in negotiations and also walking away from the real commitments. Mr. Scholz.
Well, I think that's exactly right. The time difference between making a declaration of one's nuclear program and then having that investigated and reviewed and inspected and then ultimately validated that that program has been terminated and relinquished, that's a very long process. We've seen that in a number of countries, and we've started down that path previously with North Korea to some success, but ultimately limited success. I think thinking about, to me, thinking about a peace treaty before we've even begun the process of reviewing North Korea's declaration and seeing how much good faith it is engaging in and with is premature. Ultimately, the Korean War was started in 1950, and the United States and other countries are there because of a UN Security Council resolution. So to say that this is, as you pointed out, a bilateral issue is not an appropriate way to frame it, I think, because the Korean Peninsula problem has always been an international and multinational challenge.
Yes, it is an international and multilateral challenge, but what we are talking about is how can we make sure both sides, particularly DPRK and the United States, think they are not being taken advantage of the other side because of the actions taken by both sides that could take a different stretch of time. And therefore, how should we make that timetable to make everybody satisfied and feel not being cheated and therefore could move on with their part of the actions? That's the real challenge. Having said that, though, there's another issue, Mr. Zhang. If you look at the whole thing, that is, to what extent this is really a bilateral issue, but also to what extent should it go multilateral? Remember the six-party talks, the reason it is multilateral is because the United States did not want to face-to-face directly with the DPRK alone, but rather want the guarantees from all the other parties. Meanwhile, the other parties have their concerns in the issue as well. So, Mr. Zhang, here comes the question. To what extent does the U.S. and the DPRK really have to commit on their own about real actions and make it happen? To what extent can they fall back onto a multilateral framework with which they could use as guarantee, but at the same time use as encouragement for them to act? Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think first we have to say that both sides, North Korea and the United States, have made some positive gestures or moves toward denuclearization. First, we just talk about North Korea's moves, and also from the U.S. side, we have seen that President Trump has said that it will give North Korea a security guarantee if it pursues denuclearization, and also he suggested that the United States and South Korea will suspend their military exercises. I think these are all the good momentum on this way. And later, of course, both sides should make more efforts toward denuclearization. China has proposed the dual-track approach. One side, the North Korea should realize denuclearization, but the other, at the same time, the United States should also give the security guarantee. So what type of security guarantee will the United States give?
Right.
Is a treaty endorsed by the U.S. Congress and signed by the U.S. President, or with other countries. We know the Armistice Treaty was signed by not only North Korea and the United States, but also China. So I think in the coming days, when it is necessary, I think the two sides may invite China and other parties, including South Korea, to join in the progress. I think China is ready to provide advice and also support.
We are,
yes.
We are, Mr. Zhang, as you said, in a new time, a new territory, because earlier, the earlier 6 rounds of 6-party talks, the DPRK did not develop the nuclear capabilities yet, not to the extent that they have, and the ICBM that they are having today. Meanwhile, we have never seen the DPRK and the US side would be able to sit down face to face. First time, 70 years, ever happened. This could be a very good start. However, the history could be of some reference, as we say. That's why earlier I spoke to U.S. Ambassador Christopher Hill, who led the U.S. delegation at the 6-party talks between the year 2005 and 2007. Mr. Hill speaks highly of China's key role, of course, in fixing concerns for all interested parties in the 6-party talks, and he talked about the solutions. Let's listen in.
It was a responsibility to try to bring in all these different perspectives. And I think China did it very well, and I think all the people, Chinese, who watched this should have been very proud to see what the Chinese delegation did.
All right, that was Christopher Hill, the head of the U.S. delegation for the last 3 rounds of the 6-party talks earlier. Having said that, though, China's role, has that changed, Mr. Kimball?
Well, I think China still plays a crucial role. China can speak to all of the interested parties, all the concerned parties here. The problem we have now is essentially a 6-party negotiation without the 6 parties sitting around the same table. So that's why you see, Secretary Pompeo going from Singapore to Seoul, where he met with the South Korean foreign minister, the Japanese foreign minister, and now on to Beijing. So the work, the diplomacy is going to be more difficult because it's going to have to be done in this kind of shuttle diplomacy fashion. But I think China still plays a linchpin role. China's participation and support for ongoing sanctions enforcement is crucial. China's advice to the United States about what will motivate and induce and cajole North Korea to do the right things is very important and useful. And having China's support with the United States and Russia on the UN Security Council to endorse any future agreement and its enforcement is also crucial. So China needs to be a part of the negotiation, but I think the negotiations will effectively be going on between the United States and North Korea.
Mr. Schultz, though, there's another issue if we talk about China's role. The United States and China, particularly in recent months, have a lot of things going on between them. Therefore, the trust based on which to work on DPRK issue, on the rather Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, and some of the other issues become more challenging even than it used to be, let's just say during the earlier rounds of the 6-party talks, because of the relations between China and the United States. Mr. Schultz, is there any way out?
Is there any way out for the United States and China?
Yes.
I don't remember if it was President Xi or the foreign minister who today said that or yesterday, that it's normal for countries to compete with one another. And Secretary Pompeo offered that where China and the United States can cooperate, a great deal can be achieved. And I think we're seeing those two different thrusts of the relationship play out in real time, today and yesterday, where China and the United States largely agree on the objectives for denuclearizing North Korea. And on the trade issue, there's some pretty stiff opposition on either side. And I think that discussion will take some time to play out as well. So I think in the areas where there are common interests, continuing to work together will be important. But insulating those issues from the more contentious areas will be complicated. The United States and China do have some experience with that kind of insulation and finding ways to compartmentalize problematic conversations or difficult conversations while pursuing positive sum conversations. And I think we have an opportunity to continue that pattern with the DPRK negotiation.
We hope that will be the case. However, I want to correct, it is not DPRK denuclearization, it's rather Korean Peninsula denuclearization. Denuclearization, that is a phrase being used in the joint statement between the DPRK and the United States. Those are two very different concepts. Before we go, Mr. Zhang, I want to ask your opinion as well. Can China-U.S. work together on this? Can China-U.S. together with other multilateral partners to work on this?
Yes, sure. I think China and the United States can cooperate more closely on the Korean Peninsula issue and also on other regional and international issues such as anti-terrorism, and also we have seen a good cooperation between the Chinese military and the U.S. military in fighting piracy in the Gulf of Aden and waters of Somalia. We are fighting against non-traditional security threats. Yes.
So there is a way, you think, if there is a will?
Yes.
All right. For the three of you, gentlemen, thank you so much. Zhang Junshe, Daryl Kimball, and John Schross. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us and sharing your insights. Thank you so much. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The 2018 World Cup in Russia opens with the home team crashing Saudi Arabia 5-0. But can the organizational efforts of Russia as host also triumph this summer? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. In a pitch to host the 2018 World Cup 8 years ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin saw a celebration of football filled with passion and emotion. On Thursday, in a glittering opening ceremony before a worldwide audience of hundreds of millions, that promise turned out to be a spectacle. Take a look.
Kick-off time for Russia 2018. The opening FIFA World Cup match pitted the hosts against Saudi Arabia, the two lowest-ranked sides in the competition. Although Russia went into the match without a win in 7 outings, fans arriving at the official fan fest in Moscow remain confident.
Welcome, Russia. I hope that Russia is winning today. We're happy to be here. We're so excited. We're happy. Russia forever. Today, I think we win the whole World Cup.
A heavy security presence greeted fans arriving at the venue. In the build-up, authorities promised unprecedented safety measures to curb fears over possible terrorist attacks, as well as the threat of hooliganism. If any Russian fans were nervous ahead of the game, those feelings were soon swept away. Yuri Godzinski scored the opener for Russia after just 12 minutes. By the time the final whistle sounded, the hosts had crushed Saudi Arabia 5-0. It was the biggest win by a host nation in the opening game of a World Cup since 1934.
It's a great day for all Russian people. It's a great day for our soccer, for our football. It's a great day for our team. Yes, and we will be in final. Yeah!
A lot of celebration over there. So what is the big buzz on the 2018 FIFA World Cup in Russia? In Moscow, we invited Viktor Olevich, who is the expert at the Center for Actual Politics. And also joining us in Milan, we have Gianni Marlo, who's a journalist of La Gazzetta. I hope I pronounced the organization right, and also president of AIP, the International Sports Press Association. Let me begin with you, Mr. Marlo. How do you think the world would remember 2018 World Cup in Russia? Is this going to be one of those most brilliant games in history, or this is going to be one of those most quiet games in history?
But we have to see, because
well, this
the
is
beginning
a very big event,
not
Mr. Marlowe,
very normal,
Russia,
because the enthusiasm every time.
I heard you. Go ahead, Mr. Marlowe.
Sorry. Can I go, or
Go.
I have to stop? I think that personally, this kind of big event will have a great success, exactly as the previous before, because there was a lot of polemics in the year before, till the eve of the games. And after that, now on the pitch are the players. People are forgetting the past, and now they are trying to feel the right part of the sport, the feeling of the people. Because what is amazing is how so many people went to Russia to enjoy the game. And after, to open perhaps new bridge, because the sport is opening many times new bridge between the countries, and this is important.
All right, Mr. Olivich, the passion of soccer is rising, even from the very first match that you could notice already. But I mean, 5-0. Well, the Saudi guest is also there from together with President Putin. That's really quite dramatic.
Of course, it was a remarkable success for the Russian football team. It must be said that the Russian football team faces problems that are similar to the Chinese football team, that Russia invests a lot of resources into its sports program, into its football team, but at the same time the expectations from its football team are quite limited. And here we saw a first and opening match, the World Cup, with a 5-0 result, a result that excited Russians, but also it must be said that the World Cup, as my Italian colleague just remarked, is not just about sports. It's also about building bridges between countries. And in the current state of affairs, in the current international climate, when the West, when the United States and some of its partners are trying to apply pressure to Russia, when the United States and some of its Western partners are trying to portray Russia as an aggressive power that seeks to meddle in others' affairs, as a power that is not safe, and the people, there are millions, there are 2 million spectators, fans, that have come to Russia to see the World Cup. And all of these people, you can see them, in fact, if you go through Moscow today or tomorrow or the next day, you will see hundreds and thousands of Mexicans and Peruvians.
I would love to go there to see all of them.
And England and
Mr.
Argentina.
Olivich, but the question is,
and they all see the real Russia.
Yes,
they're
going to see. Let's see what they're going to see. Mr. Marlowe, before we... I have to cut you short, Mr. Olivich, because we need to also give the other guests some airtime. Mr. Marlowe, tell me, from your soccer's perspective, soccer expert, what is likely to be the moments, do you think, and the games, the specific matches you perceive that is likely to be recorded in history? What are some of the teams that we need to pay attention to, and what's going to be the spectacle this time out of all the games?
But till now, many people are speaking about Germany and Brazil. But I think that this time we have to focus also on France. France is very strong in this moment, and is the dark horse that can also win at the end. And after, we have the enigma of Spain that has changed the manager just before this edition of the World Cup. And maybe that this is, instead to be a minus for Spain, will be a plus for Spain, because Spain has very good professionals, And also Hierro, the new coach, is an expert man that knows exactly his fellow, because he was a player not so far. And I think that we will see some surprise, because even as Russia yesterday scored 5 goals against, yes, Saudi Arabia, but it's not easy even for the team of Russia to begin in this way. And now his players are full of enthusiasm. But in the same time, there are other teams that can develop. And it is important to see after the first stage which team will have not their best champion a little bit tired, because the season was very long. For example, if we take some people from Spain or Ronaldo that will play tonight, I know he will be a hero. If he will bring Portugal near the final, but I don't know physically how he can do this.
We'll see, we'll see. But Mr. Olivich, what about you? What do you think? What could be some of the new stars that will come out, the new styles and the new ways, particularly given what has been happening over the past 3 to 4 years with soccer worldwide, Mr. Olivich?
Of course, there could be some surprises. We could see some surprises during this World Cup as far as who comes to the finish line first. And probably the favorites could be rated along the lines of Brazil. France can have high hopes. Maybe Spain, maybe, but with some question there. Possibly we could also look at Argentina.
How well do you think the Russian team, Mr. Olivich, will go? It seems that you sound very patriotic in your earlier answers. How long will Russia team?
Well, you know, to be honest, the expectations for the Russian team were so low that the victory yesterday, which was really something to be proud of, 5-0 is something to be proud of in any case. This really provided some enthusiasm, a lot of enthusiasm for the Russian fans, but at the same time being pragmatic and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of our team. It's probably, we should probably expect our team to get out of the group. So the Russian team plays in a group of Russia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Uruguay. And today, of course, Uruguay defeated the Egyptian team. So we will see how Russia performs against the other teams in its group. Hopefully, the Russian team will get out of the group.
Oh, I hope. I heard a lot of Russian friends already celebrated last night with a lot of vodka. But for now, Mr. Marlowe, what about the other countries? I mean, besides the teams that you've been talking about, the both of you, you know, we have those coming from relatively weaker regions in terms of how they do in the history of the World Cup. It seems that the weaker one, quote unquote, in performance are still in the weak category. So there's not much change at all in the map of soccer. Is that a failure?
No, for now, yes, but I think that this is something that will change in the future, and because I think that in the next 8 years a lot of things will change in the worldwide football, or soccer as you want to call it, because it's true. For example, even in the Champions League, the big team are always the same, and are 4, 5 maximum. Sometimes somebody else is coming, so there is not new blood. But I think that this kind of competition, as the World Cup and the European Cup, the Continental Cup, will put on the stage some new champion. And the problem is how after will be distributed the money between all the teams, all the clubs, and so on. I think that for now we are in the middle of the river. Now when you have to cross the river, we are in the middle. And in the future, I think that something will change, and will change especially if the World Cup will go with 48 teams. Somebody says that the level will be lower, but I think that in some way this new proposition can help other champions to come on the stage, on the proper stage, and after to find place in different clubs.
We already heard, of course, that Canada, U.S., and Mexico, they are already hosting the 2026 World Cup. It seems that there are a lot of opportunities for further change on the world map. Thank you so much for both of you for being with us. Victor Olivich coming from Russia and Gianni Marlo coming from Italy. Thank you so much. Let's have some great games to see during the weekend. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. The weekend is coming up. Have a great one, everyone.